Okay. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So Jim and Connie asked me to do today's presentation, again, to show you ClientBase and make sure that you're not missing any of the things that ClientBase can do to help you. There are a few reasons why you want to use ClientBase and why I hope you'll leverage it, because they provided, Chips and Trips has provided a really awesome tool to you. And it helps not just the agency, as you know, and you've probably been reminded, there's some important administrative aspects to it, getting your bookings invoiced so that in turn Chips and Trips can pay you. That's kind of the end game in one sense, is just to make sure your bookings are recorded. It's important for bookkeeping. It's important for record keeping. California has a lot of really strict regulations when it comes to travel. And one of those things are that the agency needs to have records for all of the bookings. That's what ClientBase does. But beyond that, ClientBase is a tool for you as a frontline agent. There are lots of things in ClientBase that you can do to really help you stay on top of your travel business. Make sure that you're working as effectively or efficiently as you can, and in turn, able to focus on selling, not just make the administrative side easier so that the selling it's easier to focus on the important part, the selling travel. I started here on the TRAMS website, www.trams.com, because I want you to know about some of the resources we have on it. As we get started, you'll see that ClientBase can do a lot. There's also means there's a lot to learn. You can learn the basics in a little while. That's what we're doing. But you can always build on what you already know and what you've started doing. And there are a lot of resources available to you, and they're at no additional cost. It's part of having access to ClientBase. So I thought I'd start here. Again, I'm at trams.com. And when you go to trams.com, in the center of the page, you'll see under the heading Customer Relationship Management, a link to ClientBase. And on that page, there are two particular things I want you to know about. We have documentation. Some people like to have printable documentation. They like to read the instructions. Well, not only is the ClientBase manual available online, but more importantly, we have some documents that let you focus on things that you can do, specific aspects of ClientBase. We also have a series of recordings, again, building on what we're talking about today. If I click on the documentation link, you'll see it actually just scrolled me down on the page a bit. And under documentation, there are several things here. For example, some marketing practices that you can use to market to your own clients. One of my favorite documents, and one that I hope you'll keep, one that I'm going to email to Jim and ask him to forward to everybody, make sure you have it, is this product resource guide. The reason I like the product resource guide is as I show you around our website, and you see that we have a lot, the resource guide is a one-page summary of all of the resources we have, from a link to our homepage to a link to the documentation, which is what I'm talking about now, the recordings, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. I haven't talked about the classes yet, but TRAMS offers regularly scheduled classes, much like the recordings, but live with a trainer. Also, there's an important live class, if you will, but it's not really a class. It's a Q&A session. It's a chance for you as a ClientBase user to come in and talk to one of us trainers. We have the sessions every weekday, Monday through Friday. And you can see the schedule and join us here. You'll see we have a conference coming up every year. Sabre hosts the Travel Technology Exchange. This year it's coming up in June in Las Vegas. You can click here for more information. And there's also a link for our support desk, because on top of all of the other resources we have, sometimes you just need some help on the spot. Our support desk are available to help you. And you can see the phone number and listed right there, and the hours. So the Project Resource Guide is a really great resource. And again, I'm going to forward it to Jim, and then I hope Jim will forward it to all of you. I hit the back button, and I'm back to the documentation. Scrolling down a little bit more, there are all of the recordings. You can see here lessons A through, well, all of the basics, the getting started, are the sorts of things we're going to be talking about during our sessions. But if you ever want to come back and review we've broken them down into mini lessons as video recordings. So keep that in mind. So between the recordings, the documentation, the Q&As that you can join in any day, and our live classes, there are lots of ways for you to get help as you start exploring ClientBase. But let's get to the good part. I'm going to go ahead and open up ClientBase, and I've already logged into ClientBase. So when you first log into ClientBase, you'll see a screen that's similar to this. I am working in a training database, so it's not exactly what you'll see. There are some differences because ClientBase has been tweaked for your agency. But the processes and 99% of what you see here is exactly what you'll have as you log in and start continue exploring if you've already been in there. If you're not sure how to access ClientBase, the agency can help you with your login information. Also, as I go through, I'll point out that might be a little bit different for you. As I first log into ClientBase, I want to point out and talk about the way ClientBase is set up, the various parts of the screen. As I continue, again, this week, next week, and then when we get more advanced in the third week in the series, I'm going to refer to some parts of the program, and I want you to know what I'm talking about. When you're logged into ClientBase, at the very top of the screen are a series of drop-down menus. The drop-down menus provide access to everything that you can do in ClientBase, and it's always at the top of the screen. So, for example, no matter what I'm doing, whatever I'm doing in ClientBase, I can always go to the File menu, click on New, and create a new profile. When I say everything you can do, you might notice that some of the menu options are grayed out. That's because they're options that are more geared toward the database administrator. They have to do with setup, so they may not apply to you as a frontline agent. So don't be surprised if some of the options are grayed out, but everything you can do is available here in the drop-down menus. One of the important drop-down menus is the Help menu, because underneath the Help you can find the contents or help file. Everything you've ever wanted to know about ClientBase is in the Help file. It's the entire user manual, except for it's made a lot easier to manage than the 600-page manual if you were to print it out. Rather, you can quickly browse or keyword search to find what you're looking for. So remember that Help menu at the top. Underneath the drop-down menu is the button bar. And the button bar is a little more dynamic than the drop-down menu. It changes. It's going to give you one-click access to the things that you're most likely going to do while you're working in ClientBase. And it changes depending upon where you are in ClientBase. For example, right now I'm in the Profile Manager where I can work with my client profiles. So quite often when you're working with your client profiles, you may need to create a new profile. So we have a shortcut button. And you can see here I can create a leisure client profile, which I'm sure almost all of your clients will fall under that category. If you happen to have a corporate client, you can keep track of that information. I can create a new reminder for myself. I can email my client from here. So the button bar changes and gives one-click access to everything that I'm likely to do at any given time. As a rule of thumb, the button bar is used to create something new, create a new profile, create a new reminder. One of the exceptions to that is the Go To button, and that's a button that you can use to open whatever's highlighted in the program. So that's not going to create a new anything, rather it's going to open up whatever's highlighted below. So that's the button bar. And then underneath you'll see we have the Manager tabs. And when you first log into ClientBase, most likely the first tab you'll see is the one that you see highlighted right here called the Profile Manager. And since that's selected, ClientBase lets me know I'm in the Profile Manager in a few ways. One, of course, the tab is selected, and underneath it says Profile Manager. Also at the top of the screen it says Profile Manager. ClientBase is broken down into a few types of managers, if you will, that are going to help you focus on specific areas of the program. Most of the time you're going to be focused here in the Profile Manager because that's where you can go to find all of your clients, like I mentioned a moment ago, where you can add new profiles to the database. And since clients are what you're focused on as a travel agent, you'll find that the vast majority of what you do in ClientBase is going to come back to your client profile. In addition to that, you'll see the Activities Manager. That's another area you might use, I hope you'll use regularly. Activities, one of the most useful types of activities, I think, are my activities, my reminders to follow up on tasks. As we go through, you'll see some of the ways that you'll create reminders as you're working with your clients in your trips. The Activities Manager is going to help you stay on top of those activities and make sure you're remembering to get them done. We also have a Res Card Manager, which you can see here. Res cards in ClientBase are trip files. Each trip that you plan for a client will have a Res Card. This is one way to access your Res Cards using the Res Card Manager. So when I refer to the different types of managers, for profile manager, for example, that just means over here I've selected profiles. And the rest of the screen is focused on helping me work with my various profiles. On the left-hand side are a series of saved searches. We call them queries. On the right-hand side, there are two sections. Up at the on the top of the right-hand side is the filter or query section. This is where you tell ClientBase what you're looking for. This is where you look up what's already in your database. And there are a few different levels of searches. You can see level 1 is the most basic, and that's what's selected by default. As you start using ClientBase more and more, you want to be able to find groups of clients, maybe to market to your own clients, to run reports and things. That's where level 2 and level 3 queries come into play. Those are a little more advanced. But the majority of the time when you're working in ClientBase, you'll be in the Profile Manager, and you'll be focused on a level 1 filter, or level 1 search. When I say that the file folders on the left-hand side are saved searches, what that means is they're literally just saved settings for up at the top. So when I click on Leisure Clients, ClientBase changed my search to look for profile type is leisure, and it gave me a list of all of my leisure clients. If I click down here on vendors, ClientBase has simply changed my search, and now it's narrowed it down to the profile type vendor. So all of the vendors that the agency works with will have a record. As a saved search, you can modify it. In fact, you most likely will. For example, for my saved search for leisure clients, not only has it narrowed down to leisure, but it's also prompting me to narrow it down by looking for the profile name, the primary name for that household. I can also search in a few different ways. I can search by individual traveler. In a moment, we'll talk about the difference between profile and traveler names. You can even search by phone number or email address if that's what you have. Searching in ClientBase is as simple as typing in what you're looking for and let ClientBase do the rest. You see, as I typed in just a few letters of my client's name, in this case ABE, you can see I found all of my clients whose name started with ABE, in that case just one, Ed Abernathy. I don't have to press enter, I don't have to do anything extra, I just type in, and ClientBase refreshes the search automatically to give me a list of what matches. If it doesn't automatically update, you can always click that refresh button, the lightning bolt, and that will make sure that it searches for what you typed in. When you're searching in ClientBase, less is more. The less you type in, the more you'll find. And a good example in my database is if I start looking for my clients with the last name Brown. And you see there I type in a little bit of their last name, and down below ClientBase gives me a list of my matches. Just type in enough to find what you're looking for. The more you type in, the less you'll find. So if I start narrowing it down further, you'll notice in ClientBase we search last name, then we put a / after it, and then we can start typing in the first name. So if I just type in BRO or Brown, it found all of my clients whose name was Brown. As you see, now it's narrowed down and it's just finding those particular clients that match. So the less I type in, the more I'll find. I'm going to go back to Ed Abernathy because he's my favorite client. We all have our favorites. And once I found that client, I can double click on his profile to open it up to see the details. I can also click on the Go To button up at the top, and that will also open up his profile. Recommend whenever you have a client, whether you're working on their trip after the fact, or if you're they're on the phone, take a moment to look up their profile and see what you already know. And if they're not already in your database, take a moment to add your client to the database. You want to get that information in as soon as you can, because the sooner you add it to the database, the sooner ClientBase is going to be able to help you build on that lead, that prospect. Even if they're not ready to book, go ahead and get their information in, because ClientBase has some really powerful marketing tools, some resources through Ensemble that are going to help you and help Ensemble help you more effectively manage what you do, market to your clients. And it can only do that, of course, if it knows who your clients are. When I open up a profile, just like the other areas of the screen we've divided the screen in a few ways. The button bar is still at the top, but it's changed a bit. I can still use it to create a reminder, but now ClientBase knows that we're going to create a reminder specifically for the Abernathy profile. I can create a new res card, which we'll talk about later on. I can create new things from the button bar. I can also use a button called, well, it's abbreviated QView. It stands for Quick View. It's a summary of my client's profile because we hold a lot of information. As you can see when I do the Quick View, it shows me a lot of details about this client. And the more you use ClientBase, the more helpful it is to have all of this information at a glance. If you click on the Quick View, you can see it's still summarizing it, but everything's on one page. If I click on the Quick View button again, it's going to show me the whole profile again. You'll see up at the top is the header. The header summarizes some of the key information about your client, the most important information you likely want to have at a glance. You can see my profile name and their address, their communication entries, which are phone numbers and email addresses and so on. You can see here when they were added to the database. So some key information, some information to summarize what we're looking at. Also in the header are the 3 indicator icons, which are going to help you know if there's something else in the profile that you likely want to be aware of. So those icons are going to only show up if the related information exists. If you have a profile, but they don't have any of the related information, those icons simply don't show up. In this case, I have a little bit of everything going on for Ed's profile. The first icon lets me know that he has an active res card. There's already a trip file in here that I've started working on, a trip that hasn't departed yet. The middle icon, it's kind of small even on my screen, but it's actually a check register. When I see that, I know that the client has booked and paid for something. There's travel history. If I don't see that icon, the client's likely to be a lead or a prospect. They haven't actually booked or paid for anything yet. The third icon, the finger with a string tied around it, lets me know that there's an active reminder. I've set up a reminder in ClientBase, something to follow up on for this client that's not completed. If I see that icon, it doesn't mean that that activity is due. It just lets me know that I've set up some sort of follow-up with this client. Underneath the header, which is always at the top of the screen, you can see ClientBase is divided into several different tabs or categories of information. So just like the profile manager, you can go to the different profile managers using tabs. In ClientBase, you can navigate your profiles using the tabs. You saw when I did the quick view, there's a lot of information here. The tabs help keep it more manageable. They're where you can add or update information, also how you can browse to find the related details. When I'm on the General Info tab, that's information that pertains in general to this profile. A leisure profile is generally, it's a household or a family. It could be an individual if you have somebody who travels alone, or it could even be the main contact information for a group if you have maybe a group of friends traveling together. But the profile is a grouping of travelers. The general info or the general information is the information that pertains to everybody. For example, you can see I've given the profile a name. And up in the address label in the summary, it's Dr. and Mrs. Edward Abernathy. And this is where that information was actually entered. You can see my client's address. And some other information that's helpful to track. For example, in my database, I like to track who referred the client or where did they come from. As I go through the tabs, you can see the communications, which, like I said, include phone numbers and email addresses. And we can track websites and even social media. So if you want to keep track of your client's Twitter handles, you can do that here. We have a Remarks tab, which are nothing more than free flow notes. If you want to type a note to yourself, this is a great place to do it. Marketing information, which is a quick and easy way to segment your client's information. It's a quick way to review what you already know about your clients. For example, here looking at the Abernathy profile, you can see on the left-hand side, I've already summarized what I've already learned about them. I can see that, at least based on previous conversations, I know that they like to travel in both the spring and the fall. I can see what kind of destinations are on their bucket list, and some other information that helps me at a glance remind myself what I know about the client. The marketing tab is also really important because this is one of the primary ways that ClientBase can help you and your consortium in turn more effectively market to your clients. Just by taking a moment and checking off the boxes that apply to your clients, whether it's what destinations are on their bucket list, where have they expressed interest in going, to their family status, and so on. This is one of the areas in ClientBase that's going to look different for you than it does for me. My database is generic, whereas yours has been customized for your consortium. They have specific codes that the consortium will use to effectively market based on on the way they handle marketing. But it serves two purposes. One, it's a great reminder. Even if I haven't talked to the Abernathys in a while, I can quickly remind myself what I know. And it's also what's going to help ClientBase help you build your business by keeping track and reaching out to the right client at the right time on your behalf. As I continue along, I have a Travelers tab. And like I said, ClientBase is based on logical groupings, often families. It doesn't have to be specifically a family, but logical groupings. So within the profile, you also have records for each of the individual travelers, the people who make up that household. And you can see in this case I have 4 travelers. I have Ed. There's Edward listed. I also have the details for his wife, Marianne. You can see I noted that's his spouse. And they have 2 kids as well. So within the profile, not only do I know that this is the household for Dr. and Mrs. Abernathy, but I can keep drilling down. And that's one of the cool things about ClientBase. I can keep drilling down. If I double-click on Ed's profile, and my computer runs very slowly when I'm doing a WebEx, but there it is. It opened up. And now instead of focusing on the household, on what applies to everybody, ClientBase is focusing on what the details about Ed as an individual. So things like his birth date are on file. And since I have his birth date on file, ClientBase also tells me at a glance how old he is. I can keep track of the communications that pertain to Ed specifically. I can keep track of things like his passport number along with his expiration date, his emergency contact information. I can keep track of all of those miscellaneous cards that your client might have on that you want to track, those different accounts. In this case, you can see I have his Delta frequent flyer number, and I also have a Visa on file for him. So all within a profile, I'm able to tie all of that information together. And this information are the sorts of things that it doesn't really matter what trip I'm working on. It stays the same regardless of the trip. Sure, they might move, but their address is probably the same, whether it's their Caribbean cruise or their Disney vacation that I'm planning. So this is where I can keep track of the demographic information, the things about my client that I need to know just in general to work with them. As I continue on through the tabs, ClientBase is also going to tie together all of the other pieces of information that are more specific and task-focused. For example, if I take a look at his activities, you can see here, here's every activity I've set up ClientBase, whether it's a reminder for something to follow up on. You can see here all the reminders that I've done. You can see my reminders to get payments and so on. I can see mailers, things that I've sent to the client. Also, this is really important and frankly really cool, is whenever Ensemble sends a marketing piece to the client on your behalf, it'll create a reminder here so you can see the details. So if Ed were to call and say, hey, I got that email from you, well, it probably didn't come from you, it probably came from Ensemble. But you can see here I'll have a little activity that lets me know that a promo was sent. What's really cool is if a client clicks on a promotion or opens it, let's say they open that email, ClientBase will let you know that they actually viewed the email. And if they click on a specific offer, it will even give you the details of what they clicked on, which is going to help you know what they've expressed interest in. I can see my client's travel history, which is everything that they booked and paid for. And you can see here, so the details, what category was it, what's the total fare, and so on. And then I can also see my client's res cards, and those are all of the trips. And ClientBase has a long memory. I can focus on just the active trips, and you can see in this case I have I'm planning a trip to Disney. But I also have a record for all of the trips that I planned and they've already completed, their departed trips. ClientBase remembers forever. In this case, you can see I go back as far as 2013 with this client. And if I use ClientBase as a tool to help me organize the entire sales process, I can also keep an eye on canceled trips. So if my client calls and talks to me and kind of go through the sales process, but they end up not going, I still have a record of what we talked about. So lots of information is here at my fingertips. I mentioned those icons. They're also shortcuts. This doesn't tell me only that I have an uncompleted reminder, but if I click on the finger with a string tied around it, it's going to take me to my Activities tab, so I can quickly review what that is. If I click on that Res Card icon, it's going to take me right over to my Res Cards tab, and I can see the details of those different trips I'm working on. So a lot of information is available at your fingertips, but the information is only, what you have at your fingertips is only as good as what you actually put in the client base. So let's talk about how to add a new client and kind of the mechanics of the way client profiles work. Before I do that, I'm going to double check the chat to see if anybody's asked. Okay, somebody said I'm cutting in and out. Can somebody use the chat and let me know if that's still a problem, or has it cleared up? I know sometimes the teleconference will do that. Well, hopefully you can still hear me. Okay, somebody said better now. Thank you. Okay, so but nobody had any questions about what I was talking about, so you can hear me and no questions, so let's move on. You know, as I mentioned a moment ago, it's a good idea to get your client information entered into ClientBase as soon as you can, as early in the sales process. If you meet somebody and they gave you the information, some of their information, asked you to call them back, or maybe they've called and you just had a preliminary discussion about the trip, go ahead and take a moment. First of all, see if they're already in your database. If your memory is anything like mine, you might not even remember having added them if it was years ago. So if a client calls and or contacts you, take a moment. You can see there, it just took me a few seconds to type in my new client, Henry Brown's last name. And while I can see I have some Browns in my database, I don't have Henry. So once I've taken a moment to make sure he's not already there, I'm going to create a new profile. And I like to use the button bar, so I'm going to click on the profile button. I'm going to click on Leisure. And ClientBase presents me with, it's a specialized, kind of a streamlined screen for adding new clients to my database. We call it the new profile wizard. You'll see it looks different from what I see when I have an existing profile. And what ClientBase is doing is it's going to help me quickly capture as much information as I can to get their basic details entered into ClientBase. It's another area of the program that's customized to your agency. So it may not have all of the fields that you see here, or you may even see different fields on this new profile wizard, because the agency gets to decide what information is important to the agency. You always have the basics, such as the profile name and address, but some of the other things here are customized to the agency, whether they're going to be prompted here initially, or if it's something you can update once you've saved the basic information. When I'm looking at the new profile wizard, you'll see that some of the fields have a red asterisk next to them. That means that that information is absolutely required. If I try to move on, click Next, ClientBase is going to come back and say, no, you've got to fill in the required fields, at least those fields that have a red asterisk. You'll see not only do they have an asterisk next to them, but on the right-hand side, ClientBase has summarized what information is required. You can see here my agency's required last name and first name and referred by. We also have some reminders about information that we certainly hope you'll capture. If you don't have it, it's okay to leave it blank, but we recommend filling them in. So all I do is fill in the basics. Since I'm creating a new client profile, remember the information I put here is the information that pertains to the household. So this could be Henry, because that's who I'm talking to. It could be Henry and Jane. Kind of how would I address the envelope, or if the consortium sending marketing, how should that label look? So it doesn't have to be the client's full legal name. It's however I would normally address them. You know, for example, if Henry goes by Hank, it's okay to put that here. You can see courtesy titles, one of many areas in ClientBase where we have drop-down fields. You'll see courtesy titles highlighted in blue. It's also a drop-down. So instead of having to type Mr. and Mrs. over and over, I can just select it from the list. Or I could select the appropriate courtesy title. Also, as I start typing, you can see their ClientBase is, since Dr. and Mrs. is one of my predefined options, as I typed in doctor, once ClientBase figured out that's what I'm saying, it filled in the rest for me. So use those drop-down lists. They make working in ClientBase even faster and easier. Okay, in this case, I don't have to fill in an address, but certainly if I have their address, I'm going to go ahead and put that in here. It's as easy as just typing it in. As I go through, notice here on the right-hand side, I want to point this out as I type this. Right now, profile state is still showing because I haven't filled it in. Notice under required, though, it no longer reminds me to get their name because I've already filled that in. In ClientBase, the agency can set up zip codes. Not all agencies have done this, but in my case, I did. So notice as I type in my client's zip code, the city and state already automatically filled in. If they don't fill in, or sometimes the zip code pertains to more than one city, just type in the details. One of the important things, especially when it comes to marketing, is that you want to make sure at the minimum, if you can't get any of their address, at least find out what state they live in. Because Ensemble cannot do any marketing to your client on your behalf if they don't know what state your client lives in. If there's no state field, marketing is going to err on the side of caution and not include them. And that's because different states have different licensing requirements. And even though you're registered in states like California and Florida, since they require registration, if they don't know if Ensemble doesn't know for certain what state your client lives in, they're going to be excluded from all marketing. They go through, you can see primary phone number, and this is the phone number that pertains to everybody. So if you have a home phone number, that's usually what I would put here. If you only have a cell phone, and a lot of people only have cell phones, I'd still put in the primary contact cell phone number here as a fallback. The general information, the profile information is shared, so it's a good way to fall back. If I don't have a specific phone number for each family member, I know that this is the one that I can kind of use to backtrack and at least get a hold of them. Notice I just typed in the details. I don't even have to put in a dash for the phone number. ClientBase will automatically add the dash for me. I can put in a description, so if this is their home number, I can mark it as their home or cell phone or whatever. The email address, and again, if you have an email address like, hankandjane@AOL.com, you can do that, or just your primary contact's email. A lot of the information is pre-filled for me. In my agency, we like to use the referred by. We like to keep track of where the client came from. And also at my agency, you can see that I already have some marketing codes. I pointed out the marketing tab a moment ago. Well, at my agency, we like to find out as early in the sales process as possible, well, what are my clients' interests? And often I can find this out. For example, if my client's calling to book a Caribbean cruise, I already have an inkling that they're interested in going to the Caribbean and that they're interested in cruising. Since I've now completed all of my required and optional fields, it's no longer reminding me. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And now we've moved on from talking about the household to just the primary traveler. So now we're not talking about Hank and family or Henry and family. We're talking about the individual. This is where if you know your client's name as it appears on their travel documents, go ahead and put it in here. You certainly can leave what you know. You can fill in the details later on. But the more you put into ClientBase, the sooner, the more you have, and you don't have to ask for it again. If you only have a cell phone number, if it's the same number, I still like to put the phone number in twice. Once so I know it's the primary one for everybody, but also here I've narrowed it down and I know that this is Henry's direct phone number as well. Okay. Now, quite often early on in the sales process, well, you might be able to discern their gender, but you probably don't know their citizenship or birth date. Again, you can fill it in later on, but if you got it, fill it in. And in this case, during my qualification, I got some basic information, so I can go ahead and put that information in. I can also note how he's related. In this case, he's my primary contact, and so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So adding a profile, the new profile wizard really is walking me through two steps. It's creating the household profile for me, that leisure client profile. It's also walked me through creating the details of my primary traveler as well. Now at this point, you see it looks just like the profile that I looked at that already exists. I can enhance the information. I can enrich what I know. If I want to go to communications, you can see here. And the reason I enter the information twice is you'll see that, for example, the phone number and email that I entered initially, it's not tied into any one traveler, but I have narrowed it down. And you'll see when I add Hank's wife in a moment and I add her phone number, you're going to see it's all going to be listed here, but it's going to break down who's who. I can also go into the marketing. If ClientBase hasn't already prompted me to put in any marketing information, or I skipped it before, or I learned more about my client, just take a moment to check those boxes. It's quite possibly the easiest thing you can do in ClientBase because it is as easy as checking a box. It's also one of the most important things you can do. Just take a moment once you've finished your conversation and let ClientBase know what you've learned. And keep in mind the marketing codes are going to change. Every time you talk to your client, it's going to be an opportunity to update those marketing codes and make sure they accurately reflect your client's situation and what you know about them. During the sales process, we're talking about their Caribbean cruise, but they mentioned they've always wanted to go to England. Well, check that box. Because if you're aware of that, when you talk to them again, you've kind of pre-qualified your client. You've reminded yourself that they have expressed that. And again, the consortium can use that. So if there are great offers that include Britain and Ireland, Ensemble will know that they should be included in that. Again, your codes are going to be a little bit different from mine, but the concept is the same. You might notice as I changed information, everything turned blue. The background for all of the fields turned blue as soon as I changed something. And the reason it does that is the information is not saved as soon as you type it. Whenever you see those fields are highlighted in blue or teal, that means that this information isn't saved, so I have three options I can do to continue. They're up in the upper right corner. I have OK, Cancel, and Apply. OK and Apply are very similar. They're both going to save my changes. The difference is if I click OK, it's not just going to save those changes, in this case those additional marketing codes, but it's going to save it and close the profile, ready for me to move on to the next thing. Whereas if I click Apply, it's going to save my changes. Notice everything turned white, so there's no longer any unsaved information, but it left the profile open so I can keep working. The middle button right now, since I saved it, is Close, and because there's nothing to do here other than if I'm done, I can click Close. That will close it. If I have made changes, the middle button changes and becomes Cancel, and that would let me get out of the profile if I realized I was typing in the wrong spot. As I go through, you can keep adding details. So if I go to the Travelers tab, remember, ClientBase has already prompted me to put in the details about my primary traveler, because it figures that at least the first person you talk to is going to be one of the travelers. But I can add more people. So if I want to add the details about his wife, either now or later on when I get those, the Add button on the right-hand side, as soon as I click on it, it's going to bring up a blank traveler profile where I can put in some of the details about his wife now. And your ClientBase should not run nearly as slowly as mine is, but as you can see, it brought it up. Now I can keep track. So if Hank's my primary contact, how is this person related to Hank? And you can select from the list. It's also free flow, so if you want to describe it a little bit more, you can. But I'll put in here, and she's a Mrs. Okay. Again, as much as you know. But don't let not knowing the information hold you back from creating the profile. You can always fill it in later on. I want to show you what I think is kind of a cool feature. If I put in her birthday or the traveler's birthdays in the current month, notice in the upper right corner I have a little gift icon, and that reminds me at a glance that, hey, Jane's birthday's this month. I might want to wish her a happy birthday. So that shows up again if it's the current month. If we're in May, her birthday's in May, it's not going to remind me. It's only when it's the current month. Okay. And I can continue on. I can add her information. So let's add her cell phone number. So I'm on the Communications tab. I'm going to click on Add. It's where I can add phone numbers or email addresses and so on. But we'll leave it at phone number. Put in her area code. Okay. If I want to describe that, that's her cell phone. By adding it here at the traveler level, ClientBase, of course, is keeping track of it, but it's tied it back to the specific, to Jane specifically. I can put in her passport number if I have it. Of course, knowing their passport's important for international travel, but also by tracking it here, and especially the expiration date, I can use ClientBase to help me find a list of clients whose passport is expiring, and it would be a good excuse to reach out to them. Just fill in what you know, her emergency contact information down below. I can add things like frequent flyer numbers and so on. When I click OK, so now I have the details for both Henry and Jane. Also, that new profile wizard didn't have me fill in absolutely everything I might know. So if I want to change details about Henry, I can just double click on his name. It's going to bring up his traveler profile. And I can make changes or add more details. For example, if he has a separate phone number, if I want to add more phone numbers for him, or maybe I want to go ahead and add his passport number while I'm here. We'll say they got their passport on the same day, so it expires on the same date. Okay. If I want to add a card, anything that I put in the traveler's profile, ClientBase is going to tie into this traveler. So things like frequent flyer numbers, right? I mean, it's Henry's frequent flyer number, not anybody else's. So I would want to add that here. When I click on Add here in the Cards tab, I can choose the category. Notice that I can add all sorts of cards: credit cards, frequent flyer numbers, hotel programs, car programs, other. So if I have anything from a Marriott Rewards card to a AAA card, I can keep that on file and I don't have to keep asking. So we'll put in a frequent flyer number. I'm going to stick with Delta. We use the same screen for all of the cards, so they don't always apply. For example, frequent flyer cards don't expire, but AAA memberships do. So that's why the expiration date's here. I certainly don't have to fill it in if it doesn't apply. So now I have Hank's Delta number on file. Okay, I want to go back to the chat. If anybody has any questions, if you don't see the chat button, you can put your mouse over that blue bar that says you're viewing my screen. You'll see a little chat bubble. Please feel free to do that and type. And also, if you want to unmute yourself so I can hear you, you can press *6 on your phone's keypad. And I misspoke. You can press #6 on your phone's keypad. Okay. But if nobody has any questions, I'm going to close Hank or Henry's individual traveler. And that takes me back to the main profile. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and apply. So as I'm adding this information, I'm enriching what I know about this client. Notice if I go over to the Cards tab, it shows the frequent flyer number, but I also know it's specific to Henry. If I go to the Communications tab, you can see how it's broken down, and I know that this phone number and email address are Henry's, but this one belongs to Jane. So it's helping me organize all of the details. One of my favorite things that I can do are link details among travelers. So let's say that at Abernathy, my favorite client happens to be Dave's uncle or related somehow. Well, I might want to actually link him to this profile. I might want to pull in his details to keep track that he, at Abernathy's, in some way related to this household, especially if he's somebody who travels with them. Well, if I have somebody in a profile who I've already created their profile, I don't have to create it again. Rather, I can link. I can search for and add another person that's already in my database to this profile. So instead of adding Ed Abernathy as a family member here, I could also search for him. You notice underneath the Add button is the search button. And when I click on that, it brings up a search screen. I just have to put in a little bit, enough for ClientBase to help me narrow down my traveler. You can see there I put in a few letters of his first name and last name. You do have to put in at least 2 boxes, something in at least 2 of them. But now when I click on search, it can say, oh, is that the Ed you're looking for? And if it is, I can link. And ClientBase is going to bring up everything I know about Ed Abernathy that we looked at when I first looked at his profile. The only thing I can do here is change. So how is he related? So he's I think I said uncle. So I can put a note here so I know when I'm looking at the Brown profile, I know that Ed Abernathy is their uncle. But everything else I know about Ed has carried over. So if I change it here, it updates his primary profile. If I change it from the other profile, it will be reflected here as well. So it's all about having the information at your fingertips. Okay. One of the cool things, and is relatively new, is the ability to link travelers to keep track of relationships beyond just this one place, but rather how are your clients interrelated. Also keep in mind here when you're looking at a profile, not only does the heading summarize the information, it's also a shortcut. If I look here and I find out that the phone number's changed, I can actually click on that phone number and it's a shortcut. It'll take me right to that specific phone number where I can go ahead and make changes to it. You can see here, and I can type over that and make changes. So the heading's not just a summary, but it's also a shortcut. I can see here that when it comes to marketing, I know I have 6 codes checked. If I want to review them, I can click on the marketing codes there. Okay. So lots of information. Again, the more information you put in, the more effective your marketing would be, the more information you have at your fingertips, because by tracking it, a lot of this is information that you need when you're building your business to follow up with your client, but it's also information that you're going to need when you start booking travel and actually keeping track of your client's trips. So whether you can capture it now or later on, you only have to ask for it once. ClientBase is going to tie it all together. It's at your fingertips when you're making your reservation. One of the things we're going to talk about during the next call is Live Connect, where ClientBase can actually interact with the booking engines you use to book your client's travel. And if you have the information here in ClientBase, ClientBase can actually share it with the booking engine, so you won't have to type it again. You type it in once and you're done. As we wrap up, I want to show you something that you can start doing immediately to help you manage your day and keep on top of everything you have to do. And that's you creating reminders to follow up. So after our call today, if you haven't already gone in and added clients to ClientBase, please go in and add maybe the clients whose trips you're working on now, add your favorite clients, even add yourself. Get some practice adding the profiles to ClientBase. And if it is a trip you're working on, if it's something that you need to do, for example, I want to remember to call Hank tomorrow because we discussed and he needs to think about what's going on. I can create a reminder for myself right from here. There's that finger with a string tied around it. And by creating a reminder in ClientBase, again, it's tying it together so I have that record. I know that not only that I have to do it, but I'm keeping track of that so I have a history. If you use Outlook or Google Calendar, this will be very familiar to you. In fact, with just a click, you can integrate this with Outlook and Google Calendar. So if you create a reminder here to do something or an appointment, it will carry over to your other calendar so that if you have it synced to your phone or something like that, you'll still stay on top of it, but here it's tied into your client profile. So filling in a reminder, it's as simple as putting here, when do I want to be reminded to do something? I can click the calendar. If I do that, double click on the date to select it. I can either tell ClientBase that this is a to-do item. It doesn't matter when I get it done as long as I do it on the 18th. Or if I uncheck that box, I can actually assign a specific time to it. So if I told him I would call him at 5 o'clock, okay, 5 o'clock's farther down, I'll say 2:30. I can actually put it on my calendar for 2:30. If I have a time assigned to it, I can say how long I expect it to last. Of course, a to-do item by definition is timeless. I just have to get it done on a day. The thing that makes this really cool is that it's linked to Hank's profile. And as we talk about res cards, I can link these tasks to specific trips. And I can go in here, I can assign a priority to it. Is it something that's particularly important? I can say it's an appointment or maybe a phone call I have to make. And with the drop-downs, I don't really have to type in anything. I can just select from the list. Of course, I could type in the letter if it's something that doesn't fall in. And when I click OK, ClientBase is going to add it to my to-do list. I mentioned the part about integrating it with your email calendar. If I check this box before I click OK or apply to save it, what happens when I check that box is ClientBase is going to email me, my own email address, a meeting request. So when I go to my email, I'll see a meeting request, and I can easily add that task to my calendar. If it's a timed reminder, of course, it will put it at that specific time. If it's a timeless reminder, it becomes an all-day event, but either way, it will show up on my calendar. So I've added the details. Since I don't want this to show up on my calendar, I'm going to leave that unchecked. But it is in my ClientBase calendar. So I close out of that profile, I've moved on. But now that I've created an activity, something I need to do, when I come to my Activities Manager, I can come in here and click Refresh, and ClientBase is going to give me my to-do list. Of course, since I don't have to do that until tomorrow, it's not here. If I tell ClientBase look up through tomorrow, change that to date to tomorrow's date, notice here there's my reminder that I have a trip inquiry follow-up that I need to do. And working from my to-do list, since everything's tied together, I can dig down deeper. I can double-click on Hank's name. You can see there it is. There's my phone number and email address, but if I want to drill down, I can keep drilling down. I can click the button next to his profile, and now I've gone to his profile. Since everything comes back to my client's profile, usually there's a link from the profile to get to that reminder. Also from the reminder and the trips, there's a link back to the profile. Notice that in Hank's profile, that icon's now shown up too. Since I have an uncompleted activity, it reminds me whenever I look at it. There are the details as well. So today's session set the foundation for using ClientBase because, like I said at the beginning, profiles are the heart of ClientBase, and having good profiles is the first step in having a good relationship with ClientBase and letting ClientBase help you do what you need to do as an agent. Frankly, the next session is one that I think is a little bit more fun because that's where having the basic information here is going to help me keep track of the fun part of being a travel agent, managing my clients' trips and keeping track of what I booked for them, I've quoted for them. I mentioned that we have Live Connect, so actually making the bookings and getting quotes becomes so much easier with ClientBase than it is if you're doing everything separately. So we're going to talk about that next time. In the meantime, nobody has chatted any questions. Well, I say that, but let me double check. Nobody has chatted with me any questions, so I'm going to put you all on the spot. I'm going to unmute the call to see if anybody has any questions. Okay.
The leader has unmuted your line.
Who has questions? If you want to mute yourself, if you don't want to be on the radio, you can press *6, and that way you mute yourself out. But I hope somebody asks me questions because otherwise I'm left wondering if anybody's listening to me.
Okay, I'll give you a question.
Okay, thank you.
When you're in there on activities and you've put in an activity, how do you get rid of it? In other words, you go in there, you see you're supposed to do something, then what do you do?
Oh, absolutely, great question. And once it's done, you don't really get rid of it because you want to keep that record, right? You want to remember that you met with them. What is when you're looking at an activity, you just check that box. And ClientBase is going to default to saying when you did it. It's also a great place to say, you know, met, talked, e-booked, right? Probably more than that. But you can even keep a note about what the result of the activity was. But that's all there is to it. You mark it complete. What happens if I tried to call him and he didn't answer? I just wouldn't mark it complete. I might want to reschedule it to say, okay, he didn't answer on the 18th. I might switch it to the 19th. But once it's done, or even let's say that I never got a hold of him, I could still mark it complete with the notes. And again, it's about keeping the history. In fact, now that it's marked complete, if I go back to my Activities Manager and search, notice ClientBase isn't going to keep reminding me to do it. But if I go into Hank's profile, it will still show up there as a completed activity. So that's why you want to mark it complete when it's done. It's there, but it won't keep nagging you. Good question. Thank you. Any other questions?
Do you want to ask him about search travelers?
Hank? I can hear
Tom.
Is somebody starting? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question for you. I think when two people are not related but they travel together, do they each get their own profile?
Well, when you have two people who are not related but travel together, I would create a separate profile because you want to kind of have both of them as their own profile so that you can reach out to them. Even though they travel together, they probably also exist on their own. So that's a good example of where you might create a profile for the first one, create a profile for the second one, but link those travelers. Okay, that's certainly what I would do. But that way you have the details for them as individuals and together. Now, if they only travel together, pick your favorite and create a profile for them, and then just add that other person as a traveler. Okay.
But can you market to them separately by listing them together?
No, if you want to market to them separately, you'll want to create two profiles because the marketing happens at the profile level. But like I said, if you know, if I go into Charlie Brown and I'd have a profile for Charlie, if I wanted to create a profile for Lucy as well, I could do that. But then in there, that's why the traveler linking is so cool. I could go in and search for, well, actually Lucy's already added as a spouse. That's an uncomfortable marriage. But if she wasn't there,
I really think yeah, I'd like to, you know, kind of have that as our policy that we do it separately because marketing is so different.
Yep. Yep. Because
yeah, Connie, and that's in the past what we've told them to do is to create two separate profiles, but this linking actually gives us a good feature to be able to know that they do travel together.
Yeah, I like
that. And the relationship would be, you know, not spouse, but you can have a relationship to primary, you know, friend or co-traveler, whatever you want to use to describe it, and that way you
could put her,
and then
you could put her boyfriend separate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, however you want to, you know, however you want to do it. What's kind of cool here is if Lucy was, let me go to Ed just because he is linked. So I'm going to go back to my good friend Ed. I like him because I do all of the experimenting with him. So everything that can happen to a client has happened to him. Because you'll see here when I go into Ed's traveler profile, you'll see that he's actually linked to several people. So if I go here and look at Ed as a traveler, you'll see in the upper right corner, it's going to list all of the different profiles he's related to in some way. And
where is it going to do that?
It's opening now. So here I'm looking at Ed's details, his traveler. And you can see, of course, he's associated his own, but in some way he's associated with Ryan Anderson. And there's that Hank Brown. Remember, I attached him to Hank. Yeah. So it shows up there. And again, because we like our shortcuts, if I'm looking at Ed from his own profile, but I'm like, oh, how's he related to Hank? I can click on that. It's going to take me to Hank's profile. That's going to take me back to that profile. Again, it's
okay, along those same lines, if, let's say, I've got Joan Smith as my primary traveler and Jim Smith is not the primary traveler, but without thinking, I make a reservation and I make, let's say I book a cruise, and it's going to put Jim's name first and then her name. So when the commission check comes, the commission check's going to say Jim, but my primary traveler in their client base profile is going to say her name.
Well, first of all, when you're in the travelers, if you realize you did that, like, you know, Jane's your go-to person for whatever reason, put Hank there. I can go in here, I can highlight Jane, I can say, no, I like her more. List her first. I just use the blue arrow.
No, to change to primary?
Yep. Now, that just changes the order I see them, and that's the order that they show up by default when you create a res card. We're going to talk about the details of the trip. But let's say I just really like Jane. It turns out Henry's an ornery person, and Jane's much easier to deal with. If I go into Jane's profile, and it's going to come up in a moment, I can actually say, no, I like Jane more, make her my primary. And that way, throughout ClientBase, it's going to know she's the one I like talking to the most, regardless of what.
Well, a lot of times we'll put the woman first, but then when you book them, it seems like, especially with the cruise lines, they tend to put the guys first.
I know, how rude.
Nothing personal,
so
but they do.
Did they learn nothing from the movie 9 to 5? Okay. But yeah, so again, it's all about just going in. You can easily change anything in ClientBase, so as things change or you realize maybe you don't like the way you did it the first time, change it. But keep it up to date here so that you can remember what's going on.
Okay.
And Janice, when you're actually going into, say, in a cruise example, even though John might be primary and Jane might be second, there's nothing you stop you when you make the reservation on the cruise line to put Jane's name first. So
and sometimes it depends on like their age, or if they're doing the 2-for-1, or what second person pays 50% off. You want to put the older one first.
And here's the really important thing too, and we're going to talk about invoicing next time, so I don't want to talk about it too much. As long as you list both Jane and Henry, I'm going to stick with the names here because I've already forgotten what you said. I have no memory.
Me too.
James, but that's why I need to put everything in ClientBase. But as long as you put them both on the res card in the trip, and we'll talk about that next time, it doesn't really matter what order you put it in. Ideally, your lead will be listed first, but as long as you get both those travelers in there, Maria's going to be able to figure out, you know, that it has both Jane and Henry on there. So ideally, they'll be in the right order, but as long as you get everybody in there, at least the travelers are recorded, and it can make it easier to track down.
Okay.
And Tom, you did a great job. One comment is because of the nature of our beast of the remote access, we encourage them to apply as often as possible. Because if they disconnect and they've entered a lot of data and they haven't applied, they lost it.
Good point. And,
so
and that's actually something in general. You can't click apply too often. I mean, it's a good habit to get into.
In fact, you don't make that mistake very often. Once you've made it 2 or 3 times, you wise up.
Yeah, but Jim, I think it was Jim's voice I heard, but thank you for pointing that out to save you from.
It was Albert.
Bringing it to it. Yeah. Oh, Albert, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But yeah, you can't hit apply too many times, and that's true, not just because of the way you're connected, but because of the way you're connected, it's particularly important. Kind of whenever you see it blue, take a moment, and you're not typing, take a moment, click apply. It saves it immediately.
Thank you, Tom. Great job.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you guys for everybody joining in tonight. Well, I say tonight, it's a little bit later here on the East Coast, but you guys still have time to enjoy the evening. I have time to go watch Modern Family. It'll be a good day. Okay, and we're on for the same time next week, so that's 6 o'clock your time next week, which, if I'm doing my math correctly, is the 24th.
Okay.
All right.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy your week. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And next week we need to better